Greetings again everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Practical Management Application series. Now, the last time we spoke about the management functions, the responsibilities of management, and remember that we said we get 3 layers of management: top management, middle management, lower management, and each of them is responsible for specific actions. The top management, strategic planning and control; the middle management, management planning and control; the operational management, operational planning and control. Now today we're just going to talk about the management tasks, the tasks of managers in the organization. And here they are on the board here. Basically it boils down to these 4 functions: plan, organize, lead and control. And we're going to cover all of them in a bit of more detail. Now, the basis of the whole thing, the basis of everything that you're going to do, comes from this: strategic planning and control, management planning and control, operational planning and control, and plan, organize, lead and control. Because if you do not plan for all of this properly, you are not going to be successful. There is a saying that goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is really the foundation, planning, of everything else that goes with it. And it links into our lectures on the organization structure and everything that goes with that. We're not going to do all 4 of them today because I want to split them up between planning and organizing and leading and controlling. They're all equally important. But for the sake of time management, I want to split them up like that. So we'll start off with planning. Planning. What does planning mean now? Firstly, if we go back to the first video, vision, mission, goals, objectives, action plans, planning means you have to accept and understand the long-term and short-term goals of the organization. That goes into all of the planning that goes into the organizational management. So, understand and accept the organization's long-term and short-term goals at all of the levels of management, all of the levels. That's why communication becomes so important. You have to determine the organization structure. It's part of the organizational planning. What kind of structure do you need for your organization given your vision and mission outcomes? The type of organization structure is important. Now, we covered the functional and differentiated organization in a bit more detail, but there are other structures that you can use. If you're engaged in projects, you will use a matrix organization structure. Maybe we'll have time later to talk about matrix organization. But determining the organization structure to achieve the goals and the objectives and eventually the vision and the mission, that's part of the planning function. You need to determine resource priorities and the resource requirements for any management job in the organization, regardless of which function you are in. So, resource requirements, you cannot travel from one part to the other of the country if you do not have the required resources. A plane ticket, enough fuel to put in your vehicle, and so forth and so forth. So resource requirements are important, and sometimes managers are required to perform, but they are not given the resources to actually perform. Now, failure is guaranteed, and believe me, it happens more often than you think. So the resource requirements is an important part of your management job. what will I need, and that will go into your budget, of course. At some other stage we will talk about the budget. Formulate policies and procedures. People will have to know exactly what policies they must adhere to and what the procedures are that they must adhere to. It gives direction to people's activities, and it promotes order in the organization. And without order we have chaos, and with chaos we get nowhere. And you need to provide for contingencies. You need to provide for contingencies. Now, all of these planning functions are important, but this last one, providing for contingencies, in my opinion and with my experience, is actually the most important one of them all, because you can plan all you want. Your best laid plans may come to naught if you did not plan for contingencies. And usually in the Western civilization, Western organizations, we don't plan so well for contingencies, because we have this belief that you must just have positive thinking. And positive thinking will carry you through. Oh, it'll be all right in the end. Trust me, it's not going to be all right in the end if you did not plan for contingencies. I had the fortune to work on a project, a ferrochrome smelting project with the Japanese, and I spent some time in Japan working with Japanese staff on their plants in Japan. And we bought the Japanese process from which we built the plant. Then we brought some Japanese engineers and their families out to our country to assist in the planning and commissioning of the whole plant. Now, from the Japanese I learned a whole lot about planning, because in terms of the Pareto principle, I am not sure whether you are acquainted with the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle is the 80-20 principle. Pareto was the name of an Italian mathematician and scientist who developed the 80-20 principle, and the 80-20 principle basically says that everything that happens in the relation 80 to 20. If you're managing people, 20% of your people will give you 80% of your grief. The other 80% only gives you 20% of your grief. If you're spending money in your budget, or your household budget for that matter, you can go and do the sums. It always works out more or less the same. 20% of the items will take 80% of your money. The other 80% items will only take 20% of the money. And so it goes, and so it goes. 20 to 80, 20 to 80. In planning, what we, with our hasty nature, tend to do is, once we have laid down the plans, we think everything's going to be okay. It'll all work out in the end. It will all work out in the end, but only after you have thrown a lot more resources at it. Because if you do not plan for what can go wrong, then you're already in deep trouble. And you do crisis management all the time, and crises will lead to you spending a lot more money. That's why a lot of projects overrun on cost and overrun on time, because the planning for contingencies were not made so well. Now, typically, we would spend 20% of our time on planning, and then we spend 80% of our time on implementation. Now, with the Japanese, I learned that they do it the opposite way. They spend 80% of their time on planning, because they plan for contingencies, and they have a backup plan and a backup plan for the backup plan in case something goes wrong, because they keep identifying what can go wrong, and if it goes wrong, how are we going to fix it. we don't believe in spending that time. So they spend 20% of their time on implementation because they sorted out all the ifs and buts and what can happen and how we're going to fix it, etc. But we, and I'm now talking from my experience from our projects that we have done, that I've been a part of, is yes, we've planned for contingencies, but we do not go into so much detail into what can go wrong and how we're going to fix it. Now with this specific ferrochrome facility that we built, the task was structured so that one part of the plant was designed and planned from our side, the South African side, and the Japanese were responsible for planning for a specific part of the plant that incorporated the technology that we were going to use. We had long finished our planning, and the Japanese were sitting in a conference room and they were talking and talking and talking Japanese. Now, let me tell you from experience that Japanese is not an easy language to learn. It's got a totally different structure, and I think you must be born a Japanese to really speak Japanese well. There are people that have acquired the knack and they've spent a lot of time in Japan, but my extent after all the time that I've spent in Japan of the Japanese language was limited to good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and where is the toilet? Now it's really important that you understand how to ask for where is the toilet in Japanese. And the Japanese for that istoire wa doko desu ka? Because in the cities that I worked with some of my colleagues, they were not the commercial part of Japan, and the people don't speak English there. So you have to learn how to ask, where is the toilet? And then, if you are there in distress, and you ask the question,toire wa doko desu ka? Then you will get the answer. Hi! That you can understand. Means yes. You could ask the question, but you could never understand the answer. And then they would point and say, you know, the toilet's over there, over there, over there, whatever. Now, I asked the Japanese, I said, well, you know, we have finished our planning. And we want to start this venture, and we want to commission, and we want to start making money. Why are you taking so long? Then they very wisely said, because we are planning for contingencies. What are we going to do when things go wrong? And they had it all planned out. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. To cut a long story short, when we eventually commissioned the plant, on our part of the plant that we planned in haste, we repented at leisure, let me tell you, and we had a lot of backwards engineering that we had to do, because we never anticipated a lot of the things that could have gone wrong, or that did go wrong. The Japanese part of the plant also had some problems, admittedly, but they were quickly sorted out, because there was a plan B and a plan C, and I suspect there was a fallback plan on those as well. So, plan in haste, repent at leisure. Spend enough time on looking at the contingency planning, because those are the things that's going to cost you a lot of money in the end if you don't do it properly. Likewise, in your management job. If you do not plan for things that can happen, unforeseen circumstances that can happen, then you are going to get into crisis management. And crisis management cuts off your brain. Then you don't think clearly and you make more mistakes, which causes a greater crisis. You know, things escalate. And do your contingency planning. Ask yourself, what can go wrong with this plan of mine? And if it does, how am I going to fix it? Then you're 80% there. Because some things happen that you cannot plan for, sometimes. When we look at organizing, organizing basically means we have to allocate the resources that we have identified and planned for to do the work. You allocate the resources that you have to do the work. And if you can remember from the last video, when we spoke about responsibility and accountability, remember I said you can never delegate away your responsibility. You remain responsible no matter what you do. You can delegate accountability. In other words, you can delegate tasks to people and they then become accountable for those tasks, and you must use your common sense when you delegate tasks to people, when you delegate accountability to people, because you cannot delegate anything to anybody that's not competent to accept and carry it out. That is just plain, I'll use the politically correct term, intellectually challenged way of doing it, which means that's stupid. You can't ask somebody to do something that they can't do. You would feel very uncomfortable if you take a diesel mechanic and you ask that person, I'm delegating the task of flying this jumbo jet from here to Kennedy, New York. It's not going to happen. Or it may happen, but you won't leave the runway, I'm sure. So use your common sense when you delegate tasks to people. They must be able to accept them, and they must be able to carry it out, and the results are really that important. So, allocate the resources to carry out the work. You can delegate, and delegation is a good tool in a manager's hands because you cannot do everything yourself, but delegate it to people that can accept and carry out the tasks. But with that, you must also delegate authority, because if you delegate tasks without authority, then you also in the mud, because people find it difficult to do work if they do not have authority to do certain things. They do not have to have total authority, but they must have some authority to perform those tasks. Next time we're going to talk about leadership, because that's the one that sinks the ship, literally, and we'll talk about control. Thanks very much again for watching. Alles van die beste.